move on to Article 8. And Article 8, it is a citizen's petition on banning the polystyrene reduction bylaw. And we have our petitioners here. Please join us if you could introduce yourselves and explain your article, please. Mr. Moss, if you could introduce your team.
Oh no, I'm going to be taking.
Oh, very good. My apologies.
Oh no, that's fine. So thanks for giving us another opportunity. We've already been here once. Second time, we'll hopefully get it. So after the last town meeting in May, we have worked extensively over the summer with the Board of Health. And after receiving valuable feedback and insights from the Board of Health, we have made the appropriate revisions to the bylaw. And the Board of Health now feels that we have addressed all the necessary issues that were there previously. And the same feedback came from the Board of Selectmen, and they both voted unanimously in support of our bylaw. So also the schools have already taken the steps to remove polystyrene this fall, as we've noticed. So these actions include the elimination of straws and also plastic utensils and to-go containers. And they've replaced this with stuff that does not include polystyrene. And on top of that, an assessment was done to determine the feasibility of installing dishwashers in schools in floral, and it can start right away. And the schools are also looking to visit other school districts who are currently composting to see if this can be an option as well. Overall, a lot of positive vibes in Shrewsbury, and I hope this green movement continues to expand. So now the next three people are going to say the changes that we made to the bylaw.
So, excuse me, gentlemen, before you do that, could you just go back to the beginning a little bit and explain what this bylaw does for the people who may have missed it the first time around?
Sure. So,
sure. So the first time we came, we decided that we saw a problem specifically with styrofoam when it comes to having food, especially when it's heated, because we saw that first off there was a big problem with how we recycle it, or don't recycle it actually, because it has to be thrown away and can't biodegrade, which leads to a problem to our environment. But more pressingly, we found that there was a major health concern with having polystyrene, because when we had hot food and it would have served on polystyrene, there's a probability of these cancer-causing chemicals to leach from the styrofoam into our food and into the people. So we thought that that would be a major issue that we wanted to combat, which is why we decided to take this polystyrene ban the first time. And we got a lot of feedback after the first time on specific things that we wanted to start fixing. So over the summer, what we did was we changed a few major parts of the bylaw that a large group of people found to be disagreeable with.
So instead of going over the entire presentation, what we're focusing on are just the changes that we made.
Okay, so but the basic tenet of the bylaw is to ban polystyrene containers from
food establishments,
excluding grocery stores.
Very good. Thank you. All right.
Yeah. So specifically, the first change that we made was last time there was a lot of confusion from different groups over who would actually be enforcing it, who would be the best to enforce it. So this time we decided we'd let the town decide as to who should be the best one to determine, and we could divide up the tasks into different groups based on who is best suited to solve these problems. Because last time we had it specifically tailored to go to the Board of Health, but this time we're going to have the town have the decision as to who would be the best at enforcing the bylaw.
Yeah, and similarly, so we're trying to just model this type of jurisdiction over who enforces it, similar to the plastic bag ban. And similarly, we'd also have the deferments that would be handed out, left up to town meeting to decide who would be enforcing them.
And in addition, a lot of people were very concerned about the punishments that would be handed out for violating this ban. So what we did was we actually lowered these punishments so that it's only a $50 fine for the second offense and a $100 fine for the third and subsequent offenses. And what we did more importantly was, before our bylaw said that there was a chance that a food establishment could actually lose their license to sell food, we completely got rid of that because we thought it was far too harsh.
So those were the major changes that we made.
good, thank you. Questions? Committee?
I have some.
All right.
So this includes straws, is that correct?
So the straws that were being used in the school actually contained polystyrene, which is why the school
They eliminated them already.
eliminated it. So
Do,
basically anything containing polystyrene.
If I could just follow up.
Sure.
So do normal drinking straw, I don't know, like you get at McDonald's or something, do those contain polystyrene? Do you know?
We're not
We're not entirely sure, but
probably.
probably, yeah.
Okay. If I could
Go ahead.
continue to follow up. So in general, I think I'm supportive of this. I know there's been a nationwide movement to ban styrofoam and drinking straws, and there's been a lot of news. I think really over this summer, a lot of disability rights advocates were pointing out that there are many people that have conditions where they actually can't drink it all without straws. All kinds of medical conditions that people have. So I do think that is a concern, and I wonder if, there might be some way to, for you to allow, perhaps places could have straws available on demand. So I know there are paper straws available, but my understanding is that those don't always work for disabled people. They don't necessarily work well with hot drinks and things like that. So
I can answer that if you want.
oh, okay.
Brian Moss, 16 Ruthven Circle. So as you look at different polystyrene reduction laws across the state or across the country, there are some that focus on polystyrene. This is actually expanded polystyrene, which is those, more of the clamshell white foam kind of expanded with air, which is defined here. So though the school removed straws, I think they probably went above and beyond and removed utensils and straws that contained polystyrene, but like a tray would be the expanded polystyrene. So this does not ban straws.
This does say straws, though.
Straws are
It
being
says-
included but also if it meets the criteria of containing expanded polystyrene. So in this case, you're not going to see straws being banned in this case because they don't contain the expanded. Now, if you look at other parts in the state, some have gone further. I think it's more towards Boston, but there's some towns there that have gone to beyond expanded polystyrene, and they're banning polystyrene. And so there you're going to see the straws, not allowing straws or other forms of polystyrene containing.
Additionally, I think since we did leave it a lot more vague as to who can get deferments and who can decide on these deferments, if that does become an issue and we do determine that straws, certain companies have to ban their remove their straws, we could probably work out something in terms of the town can decide what is the criteria for offering a deferment as to giving out straws on demand, because we think that the deferments were made so that the town could give certain companies that may be suffering because of this ban a way out. So similarly, if there's needs for specific people, we could probably have that as a similar deferment.
Yeah, and I would say we specifically chose most towns do the polystyrene reduction. We did the expanded polystyrene reduction in order to put a foot into it and not a leap into it, right? Because we knew that would be, to do polystyrene, there's lots of things that contain polystyrene. So we're just trying to take the things that you can obviously see that are easier for example, if this went into effect, the school would probably have to get rid of the tray, but not the straw. But they've taken extra steps, which is great. So this is, to your question, Mrs. Howard, that's not going to ban the straws.
Okay,
at
so
this point. But
I think I see what you mean, because it says, it says straws are disposable food service container, but then it specifically says food establishments, disposable food service containers made from expanded polystyrene. So you're saying straws are not expanded polystyrene.
So the definitions
So
are
it does-
together.
I'm seeing what you're saying now.
In the prohibition statement, all those have to be true.
Right,
each thing
okay.
has to be true together.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Questions? Hannah?
Thank you for coming back before us and doing the work that you've done on this. When you came to us for the regular town meeting, you had a list of the establishments in town that you thought would be impacted by this. Do you have an updated list based on the new definition of which entities would be impacted?
It would be the exact same because we didn't change we only changed the enforcement and the deferment aspect of who would actually enforce and defer it. So in terms of our statistics, they would be the exact same.
So we changed it on your end, or like the town meeting's end, but not on like the company's end, because the definition, other than a little bit of tweaking, is basically the same since before it was expanded polystyrene, and it still remains expanded polystyrene. So I think based off the research we did into like most of the companies in Shrewsbury, which 70% of which were not even using styrofoam, I think those numbers like still apply since it's the same type of containers and everything.
And so did you have a chance to go back out and talk to them about the changes? Have you consulted with them at all, or have they received notice that this is
I
the
think
new
that's,
language that you?
Yeah. So I think that's something we could work on in like coming weeks. But I think the main thing is that they weren't the ones that are specifically being affected. It was mainly you guys and how that's going to be enforced in Shrewsbury government as compared to how it would be affecting the companies, which stayed the same.
Well, I think there was a couple different concerns. I think when you guys came before us last time, we were concerned about the outreach to the establishments that would be impacted, and wanted to understand what they had been shown as, you know, in terms of the discussion, and then sort of what their feedback was relative, because I think that I'm still unsure exactly who in town is impacted by this, and so I'm just looking for some clarification, I guess, to understand exactly what the impact will be. And then I guess relative to that, in here, and I apologize if it's here and I'm not seeing it, but does it indicate where the responsibility is to ensure that local business establishments impacted by this are told of this?
So actually, I think that last part actually kind of answers both those questions in a way, in that even if we're not able to fully inform and have the full conversation, when we talked with the Board of Health a couple weeks ago, some of the members were saying that a large part of their work as Board of Health was reaching out to other businesses, and like how even with like the plastic bag ban, which wasn't under their jurisdiction, they had a large part in kind of outreach as like half of their job, and not just the like enforcement and stuff, and trying to let other companies know about the different policies they pass. So they were talking about how even like when this passes or whatever, it would be on them to make sure that they like, especially since the timeline gives us another, I think, year and a half or so until it passes, that they would be willing and able to like reach out to these businesses and let them know, and kind of like educate them, was their words, I think, about how the process would work.
Okay, I think one more thing. I think just relative to the chair's earlier point, that there may be people who are sort of need to go back to the beginning and understand sort of where you're coming in on this. So it might be helpful to have some of the information that you provided earlier, such as the outreach that you did do to some of the local businesses and the discussions for people as they come into town meeting to, you know, take up this question again.
Yeah.
I think that would be helpful.
Anything else? I have a question in terms of enforcement of this.
Yes.
Now, you said that there's a definition for director, and it's in quotations, but Director of Public Health Services or the Town Manager, Board of Selectmen designee. So if this were to pass, who would actually do the enforcing on this?
Yeah, I can answer that. Sure. So some of the feedback that we got from town meeting was that the bylaw wasn't prime time, right? It was copied from, it was an example taken from Amherst, which had a lot of confusing extra stuff in it. And what, from the feedback from the Board of Health was saying was that, and from other boards, was that the bag ban has been working well, you know, logistically that worked well. And because we wanted to fix the logistics of this, we actually copied that language from the bag ban. So this is actually that definition, and like they were saying, the adjustment is instead of putting it all in the Board of Health, we just copied that part from the bag ban. So however the bag ban is run today, as the director, being done by either the town manager's office or Board of Health, would apply similarly to this, so that it would be run in the same way.
But you haven't come to an agreement with any of those, either the town manager or the Board of Health, that they would be the person. So it's an added responsibility they would be taking on then at their own discretion?
They did, and at the Board of Health, they did mention at first they did have some hesitation around taking this on, and they wanted to be more like the bag ban, so that that it would be an option for the town manager's office to take care of, but I think if you would agree that at the end of that, they seem to say,
Yeah,
Yeah.
at the end of that, they said it would be fine if they checked to see if polystyrene was in the
Right.
establishment that
Yeah.
they were.
Because a large part of it is obviously finding out like the enforcement and the deferments might not be like in their like what they're best at, because that's not like their focus or whatever. But they did say that, like, I think at the beginning it was a little bit unclear as to whether like a inspector would be able to do this along with their other checks. But they found that first off that they're like it was the Worcester Public Health Department, So one of the representatives from there was saying that in terms of their yearly checkups, they would very easily be able to accommodate that, just checking in the back if there is polystyrene and finding out if it's being served. And additionally, that even like a citizens report kind of system could easily be set up in terms of, because that's what they've been doing, I think, for plastic bag ban as well, as when people complain about it, then it comes to either the Board of Health or whoever is designated to receive those, to enforce
But my
that.
point is, they don't want to put their name to it, though, in terms of they're the designee who is appointed to run this program in
leaving it open
essence.
for them, but they did, at the end of the meeting, they did say that they were comfortable taking on the enforcement part.
Just not like the deferments part, I think,
Yeah,
was not in there.
they didn't get into the discussion of deferments, but.
Right, so we were focusing on the enforcement part with them, and they seemed open to that.
But we're seeing that, it gives a flexibility that either the town manager's office or the Board of Health could decide amongst themselves who's best fit to take on those deferments.
I know the Board of Health did endorse this measure.
Correct.
I have not heard from the town manager, since it's the town manager's office running the bag ban. What's your feeling, sir, on if this were to fall into your hands?
So we would use a similar approach that we use. We certainly will execute and enforce whatever bylaws are passed by the legislative body. We will use a similar method of enforcement. A lot of the outreach was, in fact, done by the town manager's office. We maintained the initial point of contact as the initial point of contact. We have focused the bylaw enforcement, or the bag ban bylaw enforcement, on a citizen-based complaint system. So if we have complaints, we take those and take action at that time. It's not, we don't go around enforcing it. It's pretty well self-enforced, and I believe that we would use that same approach. Board of Health is in all these establishments and, would continue to provide feedback to us. So it would be something that we would be managed if it was passed legislatively.
Thank you. And to the petitioners, one last question. Would it be the director who handles deferments or hardships?
That's also up to the town.
Up to the town to decide.
It is the director, and then therefore the town can choose if it's the town manager's office or the Board of Health.
Very good. I just wanted some clarity around some of these issues so that, to pass a bylaw that doesn't have any real teeth to it, doesn't seem particularly efficient to me. So I just wanted to make sure that there's clarity around all
Yeah,
this.
just to add in there, the deferment language and the director tie-in is exact language from the bag ban that's in force today in the bylaw. So hopefully that clarifies that it's in the works now.
Mark, you have a question?
Yeah, just actually not a question, just a comment. I think I definitely echo Mrs. Kane's concerns about making sure that, the outreach to those businesses that might be impacted, that's something you really should follow up on. I think that's being responsible. And determining, who's going to enforce what issues that if someone violates one of these things, who's going to enforce it, that's got to be clear as well, okay? But overall, I have to tell you, you guys have really put together a very thoughtful and a very thorough plan of attack, so to speak, on a really important issue. And you're so young, and it's so nice to see that. Taking a stand and following up on it speaks volumes about you and about our school system. So keep doing the good work, and follow up on those things that were mentioned, because I think that's really important.
Anything from the public, comment or questions? Mr. Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Pinney. Just a couple of comments. First, because I think there have been questions or ambiguity about whether or not this bylaw would apply to the school department. I did confirm with the director, Karen Clark, that it would apply. We are a permitted food establishment by the Board of Health, so it would apply to us. And of course, we continue to use Styrofoam trays, over 400,000 of them annually in our food service operation. The second piece I just wanted to add some clarity to was there was a reference to a health concern. And so we did reach out to the Food and Drug Administration, who regulates these products. And so I'm just going to take a minute just to read this response because I think it's important. This is from Dr. Elizabeth Petro, who's a consumer safety officer with the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. And she says, since 1958, new uses of food additives, which a polystyrene tray is considered a food additive, in the United States have been required pre-market approval by FDA. Before new food additives can be introduced into the food supply, they need to be reviewed by FDA and found to be safe. Food additives include any substance intended for use in producing, manufacturing, packing, processing, preparing, treating, packaging, transporting, or holding food, including polystyrene, intended to be used in food trays. FDA has reviewed the safety of polystyrene intended to be used in contact with food and has determined this to be safe. As part of our review, as required by the National Environmental Policy Act, we also evaluate the potential impacts to the environment as a result of the proposed use of a food additive. And we have found no significant impacts to the environment as a result of the use of polystyrene as a food contact material. So the purpose in me conveying that to you is, of course, we use these and have used these like many other school districts and serve our food to students. And so we use them because we don't have any health concern. And I just wanted to bring that kind of factual information into the discussion. The other piece I just wanted to clarify was some of the actions that the Food Service Department has taken and were referenced earlier around the elimination of straws. They weren't an item that were used in large quantity, and it was convenient to eliminate those, as well as find a substitute product for the utensils that do not have polystyrene in them. And it was de minimis cost, so that substitution was made. We continue to use polystyrene trays. They cost about 4 cents per unit. The alternative product, which would be suitable for our use, is 8 cents per unit. As a result, we have not made that change. We're continuing to use polystyrene. And then finally, we did ask a dishwashing vendor to assess all of our school facilities for suitability of installation of dishwashers. And they found, as a result of that, that we really do have only one site that would be suitable in terms of space. So we don't have any intent, if this were to pass, I certainly would not be making recommendations for installation of dishwashers. I didn't want people to be led to believe that that's the direction that we are going. Thank you.
Mr. Collins, I have a follow-up question for you, if you don't mind. Sure. If this article were to pass, would the school department be seeking a hardship or a deferment so that they could continue using the 4-cent styrofoam trays as opposed to the 8?
I couldn't tell you right now. We haven't had that discussion. So I think that would be something that would involve a larger discussion with a broader group. So I couldn't answer that right now.
Thank you. Erin.
A follow-up on the statement from about the trays not having a negative effect on the environment. Do you know, was that referencing the chemicals in the trays not having a negative effect? Because since it just doesn't make sense to me that since they don't biodegrade, if they get thrown out, how do they not have an effect on the environment? Does that make, do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, my sense is that they were not found to be an environmental hazard based upon their chemical composition.
Okay.
So Judy.
They're incinerated. Yeah, in our case, they're
That's
incinerated.
true. Yeah.
A follow-up, Ms. Collins. Does the new school have plans for dishwashing facilities? The one that's planned, the new Beal school?
No, not for student use, no.
What about for kitchen use?
Yeah, and so we do have, we have pot washers, we have small pot washers that are
But there's
used.
no plan to implement something
That
in
is
the
not
new
in the
school
current
that
plan
would
at Beal School.
would eliminate this type of one waste into, some of the concerns that are being brought up about health cakes.
That's right, yeah. And the alternative to that, of course, is, and again, I am not an environmental expert, and this is a multi-dimensional issue, because once you start talking about using reusables, you have to introduce the concepts of sanitation, you have to introduce the concept of energy use, water use, and all of those other pieces that have to be factored into, which use is more environmentally friendly. And I am not expert in that. I'm just bringing up the topics.
Follow-up.
Just to follow up on that, has there been any cost analysis, though? I understand that it would take additional resources and so forth, but has there been any cost analysis on what the cost would be? Because right now you're talking about if you go to a replacement, an alternative approach, that it's going to double your cost. But has there been any analysis on dishwashing, at least in the new school?
No, because, we take a district approach. Our operation, we're operating in, 9 different schools and look towards standardization of operations. So, that was really part of the reason to have a dishwasher vendor, a person who is in the business of selling dishwashers, come out and take a look.
I understand that, but we have an opportunity with a new school. I was just wondering if it's been explored.
So what I'm saying is that we looked at the other schools, and they're not suitable for dishwashing for space limitations.
I understand.
There's only one school, Floral Street. So as a result of that, we, again, would take a district-wide approach and not just have one school doing dishwashing and the other one using single-serve containers. That would be my recommendation.
Mark.
Thank you. I was concerned, we for several years, we've reviewed potential environmental regulations to protect the health of residents of Shrewsbury and neighboring communities, because the environment connects us all. And so that's why, we looked at the pipeline, we've looked at the bag ban, we've had all these different issues that have affected us. And there was also the question of fluoride in the water. These are all questions that people have come down on. Many people have had many different opinions on these things. But what concerns me about this proposal here is your response to the claims that this doesn't have health impact, and that is expanded polystyrene doesn't have health impact, and that it doesn't have environmental impact, but all we're getting out of this is greater costs. With the bag ban, the concern that I certainly had, and majority of the town meeting residents had, is littering problems, that the bags end up everywhere and they're in the environment. So the environmental concern with expanded polystyrene isn't when it's in our solid waste system, because, as previously stated, it gets incinerated. And the other concern is that there's allegedly some health problem. But I'm concerned, are those real concerns? And is it worth having those compare to the costs that we'd be facing? Does any of you have that response on that? Actually, I was asking the commissioners here.
Just to start out on that, so I think in the last Maytown meeting in that series, they did present a lot of information around the health impacts, including a 2011 government report coming out that it's a probable human carcinogen, polystyrene or styrene. So I think they have included some of that, as well as some problems with incineration as not a solution, because when it's incinerated, there's problems with that as far as the chemicals that are released. So I don't know if you have any of that information today to present, but they did present that type of information last time.
Yeah.
And it will be presented at town meeting as well.
It will be.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, all of that.
Yeah,
It's
and
going to be.
there was a lot of environmental harms too, especially in terms of, like, even if some of the polystyrene perhaps would be incinerated. Like whatever does end up getting littered ends up in our environment. And
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It does.
so like the process isn't perfect. Like even if some of it does get incinerated, as our like plan is, a lot of it won't, and a lot of it will end up like having like harms like littering the same way that like things like plastic bags did.
Yeah, and they're non-biodegradable on top of that, so they'll legit stay in our system for like 500, 1,000 years.
So I think a big point to say is that they're single-use plastics. So styrofoam is a single-use plastic. Plastic bags are single-use plastic. So something that you use literally minutes stays around for hundreds to thousands of years, and there's not a good way to recycle it, which is why New York City and its school district went away from styrofoam, and so they had those examples as well.
Jane?
Thank you.
I just have one follow-up with Mr. Collins. Did the dishwasher contractor share any information on what the cost would be if we had to put dishwashers in?
Mr. Collins?
No, we didn't get a specific price proposal because the space was just not suitable, so it didn't even go to that point of getting proposals. But depending on the size of a dishwasher, these things can range anywhere between $35,000 or $100,000, depending on the size. And that's the capital upfront cost. Of course, there's operating costs as well. But we did not get a specific proposal because most of the space was just not suitable.
Well, the only reason I ask, you say 35, 40,000. The fire department just got some wash machines and dryers, and they were in the $35,000 and $40,000 a piece just for those to do the uniforms, equipment.
Hannah?
Did the school committee take a vote on this item or consider it in terms of?
Mr. Palish?
Hi, Jason Palitz, chairperson of the Shrewsbury School Committee. The school committee does not have an official position on this. Each school committee member who is a town meeting member will be acting in accordance with their individual beliefs and consciences at town meeting.
Thank you. Follow-up?
Yes. So was there ever any discussion about requesting an exemption from this article relative to, I understand you're classified as, there's a food establishment, but it could be written as such to request a longer period of time or an exemption as a school.
Are you asking us?
Well, I guess where I'm feeling stuck is that there isn't enough, from a financial perspective, there isn't enough information for me as a finance committee member to understand the impact to the school department about how you would, if this passed, make it work. So I'm struggling with that end of it. So I just didn't know, absent that information, was there any discussion about, asking for an exemption for a longer period of time or the ability to do some sort of analysis and then come back at another town meeting relative to the school piece in specific, allowing the rest of it to move ahead?
Mr. Collins?
Sure. So if the ban were to pass and we were to currently purchase a substitute tray, a non-polystyrene tray, the total financial impact for the food service operation would be about $17,000 per year. Food service operation is about a $2 million operation annually. It's about 4 cents more per tray. So, I think eventually, the food service operation, all of the monies that students pay for lunches pays for the totality of the cost of that operation. We don't have separate funds budgeted in our operating budget. So, eventually that would be passed along to the consumer.
And can I just clarify when you say that 17,000? So again, I'm assuming because these aren't single use any longer and you have to wash them, there's a labor cost or no?
No, I'm sorry. So the substitute tray would be a paper-based tray.
So it's disposable. It's
Disposable,
not
just
added.
go in the waste stream again and be burned at Wheelabrator.
So then, assuming that if it was a $17,000 cost across the district, what you're saying is that cost would be passed on to the people who are purchasing food through.
Exactly. It's a self-funding operation, so all of the costs are, funded by the consumer.
And one last question. Do we know, Mr. Mizikar, is that the only entity under the town budget that would be impacted by this ban? Is there any other impact other than the 17,000?
Mr. Mizikar.
I would anticipate there being other additional costs, especially if the town is going to be looked to do mailings and outreach to the business owners. I wouldn't expect those to be, significant, but probably several $1,000s to do mailers, and then whatever staff time would be related to enforcement, which is unknown, but still will occur.
Thank you.
And just in fairness, it wouldn't just be the school meals that would be the increased cost that we passed on to the consumer. All the establishments that had to switch to more expensive disposable trays would also be passing their costs along directly to the consumer. So that's just to keep things fair to everybody. Everybody would be impacted by that economically. Mark.
Yeah, thank you. It's because of that that I think it would be difficult for the school department to seek an exemption. First, to have the town impose this ban on the residents, but then exempt one of the largest users, which is the town, from that. And I also, I'm looking around the people in the room, there's probably only 4 people in this room who are are consumers, and they're the folks who are petitioning us today. It's the students who have come here today asking us for this ban. I think that speaks volumes. It would be hard to absorb these costs into the school food services budget, but I think they have challenges and they've overcome them in the past. I think it would be worth it. Thank you.
John.
How do they serve Meals on Wheels, and is that going to be affected?
Gentlemen, would that be considered a food establishment?
If they have a food permit, then it would be.
They do.
We don't know if they.
Yeah. So they would be impacted as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure if they use styrofoam.
And the senior center, Gene, maybe.
They use styrofoam.
They use styrofoam.
Hannah, did you have something?
I guess just to Mark's point, I think one of the reasons that we don't see many people here to talk about this is that they're just unaware of it too. And I think that just gets back to my earlier concern about ensuring that the people who are going to be impacted by this are aware that this is up for. And I get it's a two-way street, but in particular, I think it's worth ensuring that whatever outreach was done in the past to these businesses is done again, so that they have the opportunity to come in and speak to it or be aware of it prior to us voting on it at town meeting.
Yeah, which is what we'll be working on at the town meeting.
That's a great point. And I just wanted to add in, because I think last May, just for those that weren't here last May, some of the numbers that they had done. So I think they probably did more outreach than the plastic bag ban, where they actually contacted, I think, over 80 businesses. They called them up or they went to talk to them, and they found out that 42% don't use styrofoam today. There are some that use styrofoam, like 5% of them that said it would be okay to move away from styrofoam, and there are about 14% that like Kentucky Fried Chicken that use styrofoam here but don't use it in the towns that have implemented these bans, meaning that they're already using alternatives elsewhere. So that's about 70% of the 80 businesses they contacted already either don't have it or have it and are okay moving forward, or use it elsewhere. There were, I think, 20% where they use styrofoam, and you don't know their position on whether they just know they use it. They don't know whether they'll be okay with the ban or not, or seek a deferment. And then about 10% that never got back to you.
Yeah. A lot of that 20% also reported that they were using it for like very minimal like uses. Like there was one I think that said that they used it only on Fridays for beans, and then there was like another one that used it for like cake decor, and I think for like cake stands, and they weren't we weren't sure on the exact stance. I don't think that they would be covered. So we weren't sure. There were a few of those examples, but I think there was only a couple that used it extensively that we didn't have examples to compare to in other areas.
Right, and
a lot of the chains that did use it have switched.
And like for example, he did talk about KFC, which is one of the largest users of styrofoam. And when they switched to alternatives in Greenfield, Massachusetts, for example, they said that they did not increase costs at all. So I think that's something to consider.
Yeah, one of the reasons that the timing of this is now is because Dunkin' Donuts, which has a huge presence in Shrewsbury, I think they have four Dunkin' Donuts or five.
More.
They've already made a target themselves as a corporation to be styrofoam free by January 2020, which aligns with this effective date, and specifically that effective date is in this bylaw because we knew that they were kind of a flagship of representing styrofoam use from a corporate perspective.
Anything from the public? Anybody have questions or comments for the petitioners? Anything else from the committee? No. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.